Hello, everyone. Welcome back to St. Louis Teens, and welcome back to our new series on young venture capitalists. We are here today with Frederik Groce, a partner at Storm Ventures, the co-founder and co-CEO of Black VC, and a Forbes 30 under 30 venture capitalist. Frederik, thank you for your phenomenal support of the next generation of venture capitalists, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, and just extraordinarily excited to get a chance to have this conversation with you today.
Frederik, thank you so much. Can you share with us what drove you to the field of venture capital and what is the most favorite part of your journey?
Yeah, it's funny, for me, it's not like I went to college and set out on the journey to become a VC. And quite frankly, I kind of fell into venture largely just because I had a mentor, a friend of mine whose dad, funny enough, had been involved as a personal investor in a number of companies, had been the CEO of a venture-backed startup. And as I was sort of navigating some of the pros and cons and the challenges of potentially joining a startup, he was really helpful in terms of just listening to me as I struggled with the different, types of dynamic that go into making a decision around a job fundamentally. And his feedback, was, hey, Frederik, I think maybe you should think about becoming a VC. A lot of questions you're asking are oriented around understanding the company, the startup, the long-term success of that business. And I think instead of giving you, the answer, giving you a fish to solve this problem, let me at least kind of point you on a journey and a path. You can learn the tools so that you can answer these questions for yourself long term. And look, that guidance, that mentorship put me on a path that forever changed my life. And so, what do I love about my job? It really comes down to a simple thing, which is if I'm doing my job well, then I'm generally the dumbest guy in the room. And I aspire to constantly be around smarter people so that I can learn. And I just love the fact that I get paid to learn and be positioned to be the dumbest guy in the room consistently.
And Frederik, you're now one of the youngest VCs. What are some of your keys to success in the field of venture capital? And what are some of the obstacles that young VCs can face?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's still early in my career, but certainly, definitely one of the young partners out there in the ecosystem. And look, my success has really been about, doing the work, always finding ways to bring value. One of the things Storm taught me early on in my career was that every interaction with the founder, you should be adding and be additive to that interaction. It shouldn't be about extraction or getting, metrics or data from them, but instead, how can we support you? Even if we're not investing, there should still be a way to do that support. And that's been a good key for me, really building rapport and just trying to be helpful. And probably the greatest example of that is Black VC, right? Saying, hey, how can I be supportive to the broader community to help my community, the Black community, engage and be successful in venture? And that notion of how to drive value has really been the core of me as an investor. And then also, this realization that you're not in the localizing factor, whether that's to support, again, from an expert perspective, I can leverage my network to support my founders, but also just so that you don't feel like you're alone. Venture can be a very lonely business where you're out here sort of hunting on your own, trying to find incredible opportunities. And I think, community can be a great way to source talent and just have, folks with you on this journey too.
And I think one of the important points you bring up there is about that community and trying to support one another in every way possible. And I do want to talk a little bit about Black VC. You're the co-founder of Black VC, which is now the largest Black venture community in the United States. I want to ask, what led you to start Black VC? And can you share with us some of the success stories of Black VC and young Black venture capitalists?
Yeah, I mean, look, Black VC is something my co-founder and I originally started, with the simple intent to just build a network of like-minded peers, right? We were both sort of entering this phase, and then, broadly speaking, there was a large community, of young Black venture investors that were all analysts and associates in the ecosystem. And we were all sort of hitting this sort of 1.5 year mark, this ecosystem. And many of us were trying to figure out, how do we keep our seats? How do we get promoted? How do we, be successful as investors? And we were looking for mentors. And one of the things we all started to realize is there weren't enough Black men in the community and ecosystem to support the large junior bench. And you need to create a community to be efficient. so that, those folks who've been successful, have broken into partnerships or raised funds, they had an effective mechanism to showcase and share their successes and their learnings. And that's ultimately what the community of Black VC became, right? So that we get a general partner like Charles Hudson, raised successfully Precursor Ventures to share with 40 or 100 investors how he did versus getting the one-to-one dynamics in those early days. And while I benefited a lot from those one-to-one mentorship moments, I just realized that long-term, as the industry scaled and as the Black community scaled within it, we need to start to build alternative mechanisms to do that. And so that was sort of the origin. Now you fast forward 4 years, we now build a lot of structural programs to help solve a lot of the structural inequalities and problems that have existed in this ecosystem. And so, the three big successes that we have that really support the young community and sort of new investors are our Breaking Into Venture program, which is a 9-week program where we take young individuals sort of like yourself and give them mentors within the Black community, but also general partner mentors that are not within the Black community to help support them in their journey in breaking in, right? And we teach them a 9-week class to help them understand the basics, how to navigate your interview process and how to do it as a community. And that's going well. We've broken in over half of the individuals we've got into that program so far. We also run a program called the Black Venture Institute, really oriented around bringing Black executives and helping them lateral into this ecosystem in terms of more senior roles, but also to just operate as angel investors. And then we just announced our Scout Training program, where we're now supporting individuals that may not be full-time investors, but might want to invest in their free time alongside incredible firms to help them have the tools they need to be successful. And again, in all of those programs, they're really focused on the Black community engaging in these different arenas.
And Frederick, your work with Black VC is an inspiration in empowering and strengthening the Black community and in providing avenues for equity. And through my social initiative, helping those fighting homelessness start their own businesses, it's very evident that entrepreneurship is everywhere in marginalized communities. People have often tried several ventures to generate income and sustainable revenue. How can Black VC and the VC community now help and support those in marginalized communities and those fighting poverty and homelessness through entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it really first begins with listening and creating opportunities for those communities or folks who've been impacted, by those challenges in their life to have a mouthpiece, right? Because so much of venture is ultimately about the networks, and those communities or those networks of would-be entrepreneurs are oftentimes just not connected into the ecosystem, and that's something we have to proactively continue to work against. My personal story is one of coming out of a low SES ecosystem, right? I grew up with a lot of challenges, fundamentally. And I broke in and I bring into venture my experiences and perspective. And so I think of those communities different. I mean, one of the areas I invest is GovTech. Well, turns out government is a big component to being a solution set to some of those problems. And I realized the civil servants out there that want to be solving community-based problems like poverty, like homelessness, like people being hungry, oftentimes don't have the free time or the capacity because they don't have good tools to manage their workflows. And so as a GovTech investor, I invest in those technologies to help free up the time of civil servants so they can work on those goods and those programs to support our ecosystems. But I only do that in some ways because I understand the foundational economic opportunity that exists by investing in a big market like government, and because I understand the real impacts of civil servants and the fact that they all want to work on these issues, but ultimately just don't have the time and capacity because of institutional backlogs. And so, my hope is that by building more interconnectivity, creating more exposure for folks who've lived and gone through a number of different life experiences, as they become investors, they get to create opportunity for their networks to then become entrepreneurial and build great things. And so I hope to see you, for instance, become an investor because you exposed yourself to that community and those problems and challenges that exist. And so I'm excited to see things like venture philanthropy start to become more commonplace, double bottom line investing to become more commonplace, but also the broader sophistication of traditional investors like myself to find opportunities in GovTech to invest in a purely ROI driven model, but to be able to see the positive impact that can happen with taking sort of a sort of that kind of perspective in the market.
I think that's such a great perspective to have as well, to be able to not only recognize creating new opportunities, but the positive impacts that you have as an investor to be able to impact the community and people at large, whether that's in the government or whether that's, regular people as well. And Frederick, I want to transition over now to ask, can you share with us some of the stories of inspiring young entrepreneurs and startups that you've had the opportunity to work with?
Yeah, look, prior to actually breaking into venture, one of the great roles I had was I was the CEO of an organization called Stanford Student Enterprises that oversaw a number of Stanford-based incubator and accelerator programs. And I was at Stanford and had the benefit of working at that program as an undergrad in my Stanford career. And so when I graduated, I got to really work and help young entrepreneurs develop and refine those ideas and support the creation of these types of programs, particularly Cardinal Ventures, which, if you're listening and about to go to Stanford or a current Stanford alum, you absolutely look at programs like StartX and Cardinal Ventures if you're interested in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so, a lot of my experience is really helping people think about the business model canvas, right? Finding a co-founder, navigating some of those early challenges that happen before you even go raise capital and kind of move on to that journey. As a venture capitalist, I get to go back to university ecosystems and communities and share and be, that node in their graph as an entry point into the venture ecosystem should they want to raise. And so I spent a lot of time with underserved communities, underrepresented, underestimated communities within university ecosystems. And I try to do that not just at the Stanfords and the Harvards of the ecosystem, but the great state schools that exist out there to just provide, access and just, support them with the knowledge that I've built over the years that I've been investing. And then I had the luxury as a VC to invest in one of my freshmen. I was an RA my junior year in a freshman dorm. And when I graduated and having worked for a few years and then became a VC, I had the privilege of getting to back one of those freshmen. And that was one of just the most exciting journeys that I've been on so far of just seeing how this ecosystem really works. And that example is one that excites me, but it also underlines and really emphasizes the fundamental problem that exists, right? Networks are extremely valuable. And so that freshman of mine got capital because we were networked. We went to school together. And that worked well. This is an example of, it really being a success story. But I mean, the thousands of people out there that didn't have that network tie, didn't get funded. And this is why, we all have to be constantly thinking about the privilege we have, the privileged networks we have, and how we expose and open those up to other ecosystems.
And I think that story is absolutely wonderful to be able to say, hey, this was someone who I actually RA'd for, earlier on, and now I've had the opportunity to invest in them. But I think one of the points you bring up there is about opening up those networks. And I am personally very fortunate that my school offers an entrepreneurship program called Spark Incubator, and I owe lots of my personal growth to Spark. How do you think that more high schools and colleges can facilitate that environment for innovation and entrepreneurship and open up that network, as you say?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the biggest areas of focus, I think, of a lot of schools today as they try to create this environment. I think first, you have to look at what your institution or your community has to offer and build things that are consistent and resonate with that community. You can't look to what's working at Stanford, Berkeley, or Harvard and try to just recreate that because it will ultimately fail. There are unique components to those ecosystems that allow their approaches to work well. And so I think it begins with sort of a SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for any program you might want to build. But I think, no matter what you decide to build, ultimately it's going to come down to the mentors and the network you can bring in. So really tapping the alumni ecosystem, really going after advisors early on that have experience in terms of building and navigating and driving success. But also people that are willing to think differently, right? Just because there was a pattern that worked before doesn't mean that this new pattern, that there's going to be a new pattern to enable, a fast on-ramp to being successful. And so, building ties into some of the incubator and accelerator programs that exist, thinking about how your program can kind of be a pre-incubator or pre-accelerator sort of program to ensure people are successful, understanding, what are the things those programs tend to look for in terms of validating, and building out their classes of, new startups. Because if you can be an on-ramp, that then builds a lot more ROI and value to your community of young entrepreneurs and founders that are trying to learn. And then I think the last part is just really reinforcing the value of that there is no dumb question, right? I mean, everybody is building together. And at the end of the day, we all have to be able to ask any question. I can't expect you to know things like what does ARR mean? And that it means annual recurring revenue. And that could be, something you've just never run into before because you've never engaged with SaaS. And that's okay. But, a lot of people don't ask questions because they're afraid to look dumb. And the reality is there's no dumb question, not when you're, in high school and in college and in these early days of just trying to develop ideas. I mean, creativity is everything. And that is at the core of the entrepreneurial zeitgeist, the willingness to be, questioning everything. And those questions should be made public and aware within the community that you're building.
And Frederick, how do you think teen entrepreneurs now can leverage the resources of the venture capital world?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's more knowledge out there than ever before. I mean, when I was in college, venture had a few network ties that kind of put out information, right? You had a few blogs here and there, but the business wasn't as transparent, open as it is today. And so really leaning into, venture Twitter, doing things like you're doing even, right? To get out there, to meet different individuals and just build the network, I think, are phenomenal. But there's so much content, whether those are blogs, YouTube videos, podcasts. I would just say really start to absorb and lean into understanding what are people talking about and thinking about. And you can learn a lot by engaging in those ecosystems, and then start blogging, start getting your own ideas out there, or at least your summarizations of other people's ideas to show that you're engaging and that you're also, trying to empower your networking community as well with the information that you're starting to bring in.
And Frederick, what would your advice be for teens and youth, and how can we be social leaders and agents of change just like yourself?
Just do it. At the end of the day, it's just getting out there and not being afraid of how the world might react or how the ecosystem might react to your content you're putting out there in any way, right? Whether that's an idea around social change or a nonprofit, the reality is people sometimes put a lot of barriers that prevent you from doing the impact of the work. And the reality is just do the work. I think a lot of founders, VCs look at people that just execute, and those are the types of individuals people want to back because you don't want to wait for permission at the end of the day. It's easier to get out there and do it and then iterate. As you start to get knowledge around, the best strategies to execute the change you want to do, iterate constantly, but don't be afraid to just get something out there. That MVP, that first idea set, that first community development of V1, it should be something you're embarrassed by 10 years later, 5 years later. And certainly when I think back to the first events that Black VC did, they were beautiful in the organic nature and how they were put together. But man, we didn't know anything about building community in those early days, executing programs or anything like that. And so, it's a constant journey and you just don't want to take yourself too seriously in the process.
Frederick, we thank you so much for your phenomenal leadership, support of the Black community, and for your support of young entrepreneurs and the value that they bring to our country. And thank you so much for your time today and for answering all of our questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And thank you for, being proactive, for trying to build some new networks and ties. This has just been an awesome conversation. I'm excited to see where this continues to go.
Thank you.